I think we're good. Can you hear me, Jeff?
I certainly can. Can you hear me?
Uh, yeah, we can hear you. Very good. Well, now my audio is there my audio is. I'm super nervous, but let's do this. We have like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Um, I think it was 2 years ago when I approached you to visit the Netherlands to join us at a meetup. Unfortunately, the whole pandemic came up, so we were not able to organize it back then. But I was really curious. Have you been in Amsterdam, or what do you like of our country?
Oh, let's see. So yes, I do remember your invitations, and I was really looking forward to showing up in person at some point. And then the working from home and quarantine and the pandemic got in the way. I have actually been to Amsterdam. Let's see, at least 3 or 4 times for various events and conferences, and I always have a great time. I love the density of the city. I love the streetcars. I love the cuisine. I love the energy. I love the people, of course. So always a fun place to visit.
Cool. Yeah, I'm definitely going to re-event this year. So if you want to let me bring something for you, we will see each other there as well. So, what are your favorite products here? Is it like the Belgian beers? We also have Belgium here, the stroopwafels, maybe some cheese.
Well, let's see. I do love cheese, and I do love beer. And the funny thing is, you mentioned the stroopwafels, and it turns out that they are actually available at our local farmers market. I was just there. If you look at my background right there, I was just there last Thursday, a week ago, and I saw this booth selling stroopwafels. I said, "Oh my gosh, this is it is right up the street from me." So your culture and your cuisine have made it all the way to Seattle.
All right, so it's either cheese or Belgian beers. I will bring it to
Yeah,
you.
and probably
That's good.
cheese is going to be a little bit easier to transport, I am imagining.
Let's see. Let's see. We discussed before you're open for questions here from the audience. We're here in Schiphol-Rijk near Amsterdam. So if anybody has a question for Jeff, raise your hand and I will come over to you. Otherwise, I will stick to our agenda because we also have another question. Like we are all working from home for months now, and AWS recently announced they keep the offices closed for a couple of months longer. But I'm very optimistic, and I noticed you are even a more optimistic person. So I was curious, what are you looking forward to when you are back in the office in a few weeks?
Well, so I actually really enjoy working from home. I find myself really content and very productive, and I always tell myself that everything is fine. I'm here, but on the infrequent occasions when I do go to the office for whatever reasons, every time I'm there, I pretty much just accidentally run into a colleague or a coworker or someone I've never met before. We have a great conversation, and then something happens just spontaneously that we never would have thought to do if we hadn't actually met in person and had a real live actual voice-based conversation. There's something different about talking face to face versus on video or over chat or Chime or Slack or whatever, that just gets you to be creative and to trade ideas back and forth. So it's the person to person interplay, I think, that is what I really look forward to restoring.
Cool, thanks. And the other question is actually from the person in The Hague, Walter Heck. He's one of the organizers as well. He was curious, one of the organizers here, the IT has changed significantly over the last 10, 20 years. Where do you see things going for the next 10 to 20 years?
Oh, wow. Let's see. Well, things have certainly changed a lot just within my career. And besides the obvious of just better, faster, cheaper, to me, it's more flexible. It's in more places. It's hopefully easier to learn, easier to apply. And because of that, that's going to make it appeal to, I think, a larger audience who can pick up some tech, and without having to spend a long time learning how to use it, there's a better match between some ideas and some creativity and actually solving a problem. So I'm always in favor of making things more accessible. So if I were to think 20 years into the future, it's just going to be easier and easier for people to solve interesting problems. And I don't know if this is tools or hardware or programming languages or better ways to train whatever it is, I would just look forward to more people being able to use technology in an equitable basis.
Nice. So moving forward on that, AWS is growing really fast, and you can't be an expert in all areas anymore. So what do you think our community should definitely dive into in the future? So what kind of skills should they master, you think?
Wow. So the way I often think of myself is I'm an expert at absolutely nothing. And if you imagine having some water, and if you put some oil on top of that water, that oil spreads out to the point where it's apparently 1 molecule thick. It's the absolute minimum thickness of knowledge. And I have to say that sometimes I think that my AWS knowledge is just that 1 molecule thick layer of oil. What I do think is important is don't try to learn everything. I often tell people it's best just to pick something that is really important, really relevant to you right here, right now, and dive deep on that, learn a lot about it, and actually make use of it right then and there. And then try to add a second, a third, or a fourth service. And this to me applies not just to learning, but to using as well. But I also, one of my learning philosophies that's worked really well over the years is learn enough about something to get started. If there's documentation, read through the documentation once, learn enough to get started, build something useful, get some experience, get a little bit of understanding and perspective. But at a certain point, I always go back and I'll reread all the documentation a second time or a third time. And this is very different than just doing a quick search and reading one reference page for one API or one function. Going back and reading first page to last page after you've used the service a bit always gives me a fresh perspective and helps to put a lot of little bits and pieces into a better context after that experience.
Cool. I heard you saying oil and water in the beginning of your answer, and that actually is a nice bridge to the next one, because we learned that AWS invests a lot in lowering their carbon footprint, and customers could also contribute to this mission by optimizing workloads, generally by saving costs. Earlier today, Sophie Vos, she shared her findings on her thesis on this matter, and is wondering if you have a great advice for customers to lower their carbon footprint by optimizing their workloads in AWS.
Well, I wish I could have actually seen Sophie's presentation and would look forward to learning more. I do think that the general understanding that we have gained over the years is that simply running in the cloud should be more efficient than running in your own data center. And that is apparently true for a couple of different reasons. The first is typically utilization of hardware is going to be higher. So you're getting better value from the resources that you do have. But second, because as an operator of a very, very large scale cloud, we have opportunities to optimize in ways that would probably be very difficult if you're running just your own data center, or if you've got a couple servers in a colo somewhere. We have opportunities to understand behavior at scale. We have opportunities to engineer hardware in a very, very specific kinds of ways. And I think this is a really interesting situation where running at large scale gives a really interesting perspective and advantage on how to run really well. But I would say if you focus on cost optimization, in many cases, you're probably focusing on energy utilization optimization as well, because you're thinking of, let me just use the bare number of resources that I really need. And you don't keep instances running if you don't need them. Pick moderately sized instances if that's all you need. Use auto scaling and so forth to just dial in more power as you need it.
Yeah, and you actually answered the next question as well, because that was, do we ever see the sustainability being part of the well-architected framework? But yeah, you said cost optimization and sustainability are almost connected to each other.
Yeah, I would say in general, paying attention to metrics is always a good thing. Back in the days when I used to run my own servers, and I used to actually and I'd have servers, I'd have log files, I'd have command lines running. Something I found very, very useful was to always just watching logs scroll by and watching various utilization metrics and CPU and memory and CPU temperatures and so forth, and just to get this almost intuitive feel for what normal looks like. So at the point when things might start to go a little bit weird, even before you might exceed boundaries and start firing actual alarms, getting that sense for what normal looks like when you're running a system, I think, is a very valuable thing to do.
Thanks. I'm not sure if you can see it as well, but we even have a question from the remote audience. So I will read it out. What fundamental skill have you learned early in your career that is still important the way you work today?
So something that has worked really well for me is that I'm not afraid to jump in when I actually don't fully understand what I'm doing. And this doesn't mean I go in and do things at random, but it means that I will learn just enough to get started. And I don't depend on having to really master something before I'm willing to try something out. If I have just a somewhat vague understanding of how to do something, I'm going to give it a try. And I won't let my lack of understanding get in the way, because I always figure that after having invested some energy into something, that I will figure out some more solutions as I go along. And trying things out early, being the early adopter, living a little bit on the edge has always led to really good results and opportunities for me.
Cool. Thanks. And also thanks, Ivakic. I'm not sure what his name is, but thank you for asking the question. The next one is actually by myself, because when I accepted my current job as a cloud evangelist, a friend responded, you became the Jeff Barr of your company. And the person is actually sitting there. So I was curious, if somebody else had your job within AWS, what would you be doing in AWS?
Oh, let's see, what would I be doing? So something I've been doing increasingly in my role is to help make sure that we have a really strong next generation of developer advocates and bloggers and evangelists. And I'm actually kind of lucky in my role that I don't have to do any people management, but instead I do some mentoring, I do some advising, and I work with all of our other bloggers to review their content and give them feedback. So it's really important after you've had some level of time and success in your career, and you've had some amazing opportunities. I think it's really important to make sure that the next generation gets those opportunities as well.
Cool, thanks. Before the final question, the last one, you wrote more than 1,000 blog posts over more than a decade. Which of all the new services or new feature announcements was the most exciting launch for you?
Okay. So actually, I'm at well over 3,000, believe it or not. I've got 1,000 something posts on my personal blog, but that's kind of, I've left that one behind for a bit. My AWS blog, I think I'm at 3,200. And as far as favorites, I still think back to the launches of EC2 and S3 and probably Lambda at this point as like, wow, these were things that you look at and they were immediately obvious to the readers. Wow, this is a really cool, great step forward. They were amazing for their time, and people said, this is great. I understand what it is. I can use it. But then you look at what has happened since all of those, and we just hit the 15-year mark for both EC2 and for S3. We still continue to innovate in really important ways for both of those services. And so I look back on those and I'm really pleased with just how they set the stage for so much great, not just innovation, but understanding and use by our customers.
We'll walk a little bit to the back because we have a question.
Yeah, hi. So Ben here. I was wondering, in your career, you must have seen some interesting engineering problems, and maybe could you share an anecdote on some of the hardest, most headache-causing problems that you've maybe solved or maybe not?
Ooh. Wow, Ben, that's a really interesting question. So interesting problems that I've solved. Wow. Well, let's see. Way back at the beginning of my career, I started this little company, and they handed me some hardware and an operating system, and they said, could you run 4 copies of this operating system on the same hardware? And I didn't even have my degree at this point, and I was still going to school part-time. And I just said, sure, I'm sure I can figure out a way to run 4 copies of this operating system at the same time. And I studied how the processor worked. I studied how all of the memory management worked. And I set up this really cool, essentially virtual isolated environment. And I ran 4 copies of this OS side by side. I had to write all of my own drivers for the hard disk and for the terminal and all the other pieces of hardware on there. And I successfully managed to do this. And it was one of those, like I said, it's often fun and worthwhile just to jump in and say, I can do this, when you're not fully confident that you understand all the details, but you know enough to think, well, I will get myself into this little bit of kind of fun trouble, and I'll just solve it as I go along. So that was probably close to 40 years ago at this point, but I still have mostly pleasant memories of how neat it was to understand all the hardware in great detail and to be able to run all these OSs side by side.
Hey, Jeff, this is Luke. Can you hear me?
I sure can, Luke.
Okay, sure. Staying with the topic of sustainability, I think there are 5 regions that are carbon neutral, or at least using renewable energy, including Ireland and Frankfurt. Do you know if Amazon has any plans to increase the number of regions that are carbon neutral? And maybe also as a hint to the rest of the audience, if you want to be carbon neutral, you can choose a specific region for that.
Luke, so this is a really important topic, and I think you probably might know a little bit more than I do about the specifics of the status of each of our regions. I know that as a company, we are the originators and strong supporters of the climate pledge. We're working to get the company to carbon neutrality just as quickly as possible, and certainly the regions and the data centers within those are a really important part of that. I know we have, I don't know the exact number, but I want to say 60 something different renewable energy projects underway right now. There is a sustainability page somewhere on the AWS site that probably has better metrics than I do, but it's certainly something important. And keep in mind, as we are getting to sustainability and carbon neutrality on each of these regions, is that we're chasing an important moving target. If you look at the scale of AWS and the growth rate, the last year's growth rate was 20 something %. So you have to realize whatever growth rate we are in business, effectively we need to make up even that much more in terms of sustainability and carbon neutrality in order just to stay even. So when you see us hopefully pulling ahead, we're doing more than simply doing more at the static situation. We're addressing the growth as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, if there are no questions, there's one question. Yeah, we have time for 2, I think.
Hi, Jeff. This is Samir. So in this cloud-driven world, the new students or new interns or new developers who do not have an experience with, working with data centers, do not understand the importance of cloud. So what advice would you give to the newcomers who are starting their journey with cloud?
That's a really interesting question. And I fully identify with what you mean, because I think back to the earliest days of my time with computers, and it was just bare metal and switches and lights, and you'd start out with just an empty memory and a processor, and you could load a program in through the switches or through a paper tape, and it was very slow and very simple. But the value there was, if you chose to, you would really understand the system from the hardware on up. You'd say, okay, here's the program counter, and here's the registers, and here's the instruction set. And I can, by understanding that and understanding the boot process, I can really understand this just really level by level. I don't know for sure exactly what the newest equivalent of that is. There's actually a book I'm reading. I don't remember the title offhand. It's behind my green screen, or I'd go get it. But there's a website, I think it's called NAND to Tetris, that takes you through the whole process of, here's very simple Boolean logic up through more complicated arithmetic logic units to processors to writing a compiler and a runtime and all those different aspects of low-level operations. I think there's great value in understanding that, because once you know it, there's no place for problems to actually hide. With enough understanding and enough thought, you can actually reason your way through just about any problem. And you can say, well, for me to see this kind of bug, this is what must be going wrong. And you can then just peel back the layers of the system and say, let me just, if necessary, just dive deeper and deeper and deeper to the bare metal, if necessary, to think about what might be going wrong to cause this particular problem to occur.
Thanks. You have time for a final question?
I sure do, yeah.
Thanks for that, though. Hey, Jeff, my name is also Luke, different spelling though. But I was wondering about something you mentioned earlier, which is you mentioned also coaching some of the developer advocates. And I think quite a lot of advocates and community builders are here as well. And I was wondering if you can maybe share some fundamental tip or something else that you think would make the content much better for a generic builder or blog poster or basically any.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is a great question, and we could probably do an entire session on that at some future meeting.
Time for one, basically.
Okay, let's see. To me, it's all about having incredibly good communication skills, and to be able to communicate something really well, you simply need to understand it at the most detailed level you possibly can. Understand something in depth, and then as part of building your understanding, simply document it. And whether that could be a blog post, it could be an article somewhere, it could be some code, it could be a video, it could be music for all I know. But any way to I think the process of learning and then sharing actually go together really nicely. And when you feel comfortable enough with a topic to be able to share it, that's essentially all we get to do as developer advocates. We learn something in great detail, and then we share it with our audience. The rest is really interesting around the sides of being able to use social media and so forth. But the fundamental act of being a developer advocate, I think, is just deep understanding and then sharing.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks also for all the questions here. I think it's time to wrap up. Jeff, any final words from you to the audience?
Can't think of any. This has been really fun and a really worthwhile use of my time. I have to say that I love to travel. I love to get out of the city and to meet people. But this is also, to me, a pretty productive way to participate in events remotely. I'm sitting here in my home office. This is actually the third event I'm participating in today, believe it or not. So it's actually a very worthwhile, productive use of my time.
Thank you very much. And it's 2 years ago, I think, for me to ask for an applause. And it's actually possible right now. So give an applause for Jeff Barr.
Thank you so much.
Jeff.
Alrighty.